I think that we can use the Monte Carlo results to sort of predict what's going to be going on in the clay court season, and I feel like it's a really good telltale signs about how some of the players are going to play. Of course, Jannik Sinner didn't participate, and it's not really a high profile tournament compared to a Grand Slam, but I think it's the first bigger clay court tournament coming in to the clay swing, so I think this is really going to be a big deal. So yeah, welcome tennis fans to Tennis Traverse, Exploring a Game, the podcast that delves into the heart of the tennis world. I'm your host, Ivy Zhang, and in today's episode I will be talking about the Monte Carlo Open, so let's get right into it. So I want to use this tournament as sort of a platform to just talk about what we can expect from clay court season based on their performances here and just the overview of the clay court season. So I guess we'll just go by rounds and talk about interesting matchups in each round. So I want to start off with the round of 64, and I just want to talk about the matchup between Jordan Thompson and Mpetshi Perricard. So I think this is an interesting matchup because Jordan Thompson is I think he's a really good clay court player. Obviously, his season this year is just nowhere near as to how well he performed last year, but I still think that he is obviously improved a lot, and Perricard too, he had his breakthrough last season. However, what I was trying to say is I don't think clay court necessarily suits Perricard's playing style because Perricard is focused rather more on his serve. His serve is his main weapon. However, it's really hard to serve an ace on the clay court because the ball becomes so much slower. So I think obviously Perricard still served 9 aces, which is a lot, but I think this is going to be something he needs working on, which is improving his other shots, other ground strokes, so he can do better on clay, because on hard court his main weapon is his serve and it's really effective. But I think in order to do well on all surfaces, he really need to make sure that his ground strokes are up to par with how he plays how he serves, basically. Okay. So now I want to talk about some other matchups. So let's see. I think there are a lot of great matchups that took place. I want to talk about Alejandro Davidovich versus Ben Shelton. I'll leave a link to all the round of 64 matches I talked about because I think a lot of them are interesting. And I think there's a highlight with all of them in it. So I'll just make sure to put that in. For this match, I think I expected Shelton to win. Obviously, Alejandro Davidovich had his best start in the season for forever. I feel like this is his best start of the season in his entire career. And however, I just didn't know how well that success was going to translate to clay court because all of his successes were on hard courts. But I think he went through pretty well because he's been playing great and he's been beating a lot of players. After he lost the first set against Ben Shelton, he just completely overturned this matchup pretty easily, and I think that's pretty impressive. Okay, now I want to talk about some other round of 64 matches. Medvedev versus Khachanov was a surprise because I thought that Khachanov was going to beat Medvedev. I think Khachanov have a better head-to-head against Medvedev. He's leading in a head-to-head. And as we all know, Medvedev isn't really the clay court player that everyone expects. His clay court level is completely behind his hard court level. To be completely honest, he didn't perform that well this year on hard courts either way, but I just feel like his hard court is still so much better. But he actually beat Khachanov, and I think that was a pretty statement win from him. I feel like he really needs these wins to just boost his confidence. And however, on another note, I want to talk about Felix Auger-Aliassime losing to Altmaier. This was unexpected because I really expected him to go pretty far in this tournament. I mean, I don't necessarily mean that I expected him to get a title, but I think clay is a great surface for him, and I expected him to go pretty far in this tournament. And he lost in 2 straight sets. Obviously, he's been hindered by injury for the past few years, and for this season, my expectation for him is for him to just go to where he was before his injuries. And I know it's really hard to come back from all of those injuries, but I just feel like he could have performed so much better. This was a bit of a lackluster performance from him, but overall, I just feel like he can use this as a practice opportunity, because in the end, this is not a Grand Slam. This is a practice tournament for the players to figure out what their weaknesses are going into Roland Garros. So I think this is a great opportunity for him to figure out what's wrong with his game or what he can improve on. I think that's what a lot of players did. For example, Alexander Zverev, Novak Djokovic, when they lost early in Indian Wells, they noticed what happened, and they are able to use that and train and go further in Miami in case of Djokovic. Zverev we will talk about later on. Okay, so now we'll move on to the round of 32. I think the match I want to talk about is obviously going to be Berrettini versus Zverev, which I just mentioned. I just think he puts a lot of effort into being the world, like into protecting his ranking and getting that world number 1. And I think that's getting to his head, because his performance after Australia has just been horrendous. Like, he hasn't been performing well at all. I know he wished to enter the clay swing sort of right after Australia, because, as he said, he needs practice, and he normally doesn't really do well when he's just immediately thrown into a competitive clay court tournament. But I think he also wanted to get the points because it's less competitive than Monte Carlo for sure. However, he lost really early in that tournament, like in those tournaments, and he did not get the points he wanted. And then in Indian Wells, he also did bad. He lost first round, I believe. Same thing with Miami. Even though he did go a little further, I don't think it was where he wanted to be. And coming into Monte Carlo, I just feel like his confidence was at an all-time low, and I think that was pretty evident. I mean, Berrettini is an incredible player. He's playing great, and I think his game really suits clay court. I sort of mentioned this in my last episode, but I think his weakness of his backhand sort of just is more neutralized on a clay court. But at the same time, I feel like Zverev should be able to beat Berrettini because clay court is Zverev's best surface. So I just really hope that he can just get himself back into the game, because under this form, I think he's not going to be able to win Roland Garros. Like, there's no chances at all. And then other round of 32 matches I want to talk about is Djokovic versus Tabilo. So for this match, I think it was kind of unusual for Djokovic because his coach, Andy Murray, wasn't there, and he was actually coached by his brother. And I feel like that might have played a little bit into it. But overall, I just feel like Djokovic really needs to build on consistency. I know he's known for consistency when he's younger and when he's more in shape. But now, because of his age and because he's not in the shape he was when he was younger, he really needs consistency right now to, first of all, get his 100th title. Second of all, just to prepare himself for Roland Garros. And I think Roland Garros is really open this year. I truly think anyone can win that tournament. I mean, Jannik Sinner, Jack Draper, Lorenzo Musetti, Carlos Alcaraz, Novak Djokovic maybe, because I don't think Jannik Sinner, well, okay, I think Jannik Sinner is going to do well, but he hasn't played, and I feel like the lack of tournament is going to draw him back a little. And like, Zverev is really bad right now. Carlos, he won Monte Carlo, but realistically, I just feel like it's really unpredictable this year. So yeah, I think Djokovic really needs to get confidence from these longer runs and hopefully get somewhere and just get his, I hope he gets his 100th title before Roland Garros, but if he gets it at Roland Garros, I think it's going to be magical, but I'm really doubtful if that's going to happen. Sorry if you guys just heard my door like creak. Anyways, okay, we'll move on to the round of 16th. I want to talk about Alex de Minaur. I want to talk about Alex de Minaur because he's been playing really well. He's won all his matches like in 2 straight sets, and in the semifinals he lost to Musetti, who is a clay court specialist, but he double bageled Dimitrov in the quarterfinal, and he beat Medvedev 6-2, 6-2. I think he's just on fire right now. He's someone I will watch as well, just going into Roland Garros. I also want to talk about now the quarterfinals. So for the quarterfinals, we'll talk about all 4 matches. Musetti versus Tsitsipas. So Tsitsipas is known for being a Monte Carlo specialist. No matter how he performs in the earlier matches in the earlier season, he's always going to do really well in Monte Carlo just to get a title even. However, this is not what happened at all. I mean, he did go pretty far. He went to the quarterfinals, but Musetti just dominated towards the end. And even though he lost the first set 1-6, he completely turned it around. And it really meant a lot to Musetti. However, I know after this loss, Tsitsipas is going to drop out of the top 15th in the world, which was like a long time ago. His last time to be out of the world's top 15 was in 2018, which is insane. But I mean, I think he got a title, and I don't even think this is a big setback for him in terms of, okay, well, it's a big setback in terms of ranking points, but I think he's not in that bad of a form right now, and I think he could really get some points in the season, like going into Roland Garros, because I think he is in shape of getting a title because he's been playing great. The other quarterfinals, de Minaur versus Dimitrov. I mean, as I said before, straight up double bagel, and it was just completely dominant from de Minaur. He played great, and Grigor, I don't think he played horrible, but if you look at the points, he only won 15 points, whereas de Minaur won 48, so that's like a pretty dominant performance. So yeah, okay, and then I want to talk about Fils versus Alcaraz. This was, I think, one of the better matches this tournament because it was the 3rd setter, and Fils, I think his game really suits the clay court surface, and it really just brought his entire game out in Monte Carlo. I think he's an amazing player in Monte Carlo, and I think that perfectly showed. But I really appreciate and just admire Carlos Alcaraz's ability to turn it back, because I think in this tournament he was down a set 3 times. He was down a set the first round of 32, he was down a set against Felix in the quarterfinal, he was down a set against Musetti in the final. He was able to turn it around, and I think that's an ability that is really unique, and it just kind of reminded me of how well he plays on clay. I think going into this tournament, a lot of people predicted him to not do that well because of how he performed in Miami and Indian Wells, which wasn't that great. I mean, in Indian Wells, that performance against Jack Draper, and then in Miami, the Goffin performance was just really unlike him, but I think he did great in this situation. Okay, now I want to talk about the last quarterfinal. So Davidovich Fokina versus Poprin. I sort of mentioned this, like Fokina is just on fire, and I really hope that he can get a title because he's been playing really great. For the semifinals, we have Musetti versus Minaur and Alcaraz versus Davidovich. So Musetti was able to turn the semifinals around after losing the first set 1-6 in the first set, and I think that's pretty impressive considering I feel like Musetti really didn't have a lot of match play experience at such a high level this season yet because of his injuries, and when he played against Djokovic and lost, that was just really unexpected to me because he didn't perform well at all. It was really just a poor performance. It looked like he was completely out of it, but I think this was a much better performance from him, and that's what I like to see. I then want to talk about Carlos Alcaraz versus Davidovich. I mean, I think Alcaraz is just on fire, and Fokina was able to get a tiebreak in the first set, which is already pretty impressive. And then we'll talk about the final, which is somewhat a lackluster final because Musetti was clearly compromised in the third set. It was a problem with his hip, and I mean, the first set, I feel like Carlos was just taken away by the nerves, and he lost really quickly 1-6. The second set, I feel like Musetti just had trouble closing it in and closing it up, and I think everything just felt too real for him that he could get a Monte Carlo title. And then the deciding set, Musetti was clearly compromised. He called several medical timeouts, and he didn't want it to pull out, and he went out. But we could clearly tell that he was compromised, and it was somewhat just not a really great final. But I think what this means for Carlos is more confidence because he really needs this title after how he performed in Miami and Indian Wells, and I think this shows to the people that he is capable of winning a title despite like a really bad performance for the past few weeks. And I think this is a good start to his clay court season because he started off with a title, and I mean, with the way Zverev is playing and the unknown quantity that is Jannik Sinner, I think a lot of people will favor Alcaraz to win French Open. Obviously, we don't know how he's going to perform. He normally performs really great at Grand Slams. We don't know if a performance that's like completely out of the ordinary appears and he just lost, but like he will just completely lose. But like in the end, I think this was a pretty good performance from him. So yeah, I think that's all for today's episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you haven't subscribed to my social medias, you should. It's at Tennis Traverse. That is at Tennis Traverse on Instagram and Twitter. If you're listening on YouTube, comment, like, and subscribe. If you are listening on other streaming platforms, please rate my show. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.